The first time it happened on my shift, I thought it was a miracle. 5 hikers, missing 72 hours, no trail sign, no pack debris, SAR dogs completely useless, and then Tuesday at 3:17 a.m. they just walked into the trailhead lot together. Headlamps off, packs still zipped, talking quietly among themselves like they'd come back from a long dinner. I processed them, filed the return report, and went home feeling good about the outcome. It took me 4 more returns before I realized no one on my team had ever used the word found. They always said returned, like the distinction mattered to them. I should back up. I'm Galvan. 4 years at Elk Basin Ranger Station in the Colorado Rockies day shifts, trail maintenance, permit checks, the occasional medical assist when someone rolls an ankle on the scree fields above Lake Marion, full staff. 12 rangers in summer rotation plus SAR coordination out of the district office in Granby. I'm not alone out here. The parking lots are full by 8 a.m. in July. The trails have traffic problems. That's what makes this harder to explain. Everything I'm about to describe happened in a busy, populated, fully operational national park where the system works exactly the way it's supposed to. That's the problem. My first summer, most missing hiker cases resolved the way you'd expect. Somebody takes a wrong turn, gets dehydrated, gets found. You write the report, you use the word found, and the case closes. But in August 2022, a group of 3-day hikers vanished off the Roaring Fork Trail. Permit signed, car in the lot, phones dead. SAR dogs got nothing. Helicopter got nothing. By day 3, the station had gone quiet in the specific way that means people have stopped planning rescues and started rehearsing phone calls to families. Then they walked in. 3:17 a.m. 4th night, Glacier Creek Trailhead. All 3, side by side. I wasn't there. A night shift ranger named Brewer handled intake. But I read the return report the next morning and something snagged in my head. There was no recovery narrative, no coordinates for where they'd been located, no condition notes beyond 6 words, ambulatory, no visible injury, cooperative with intake. The report didn't read like the end of a search. It read like the end of a reservation. I asked Brewer about it at lunch. He was eating a sandwich, not looking at me. How'd they seem? Fine, calm, little quiet. Where'd they been? Couldn't say, they didn't really know. 3 days in the high country and they didn't know? They said they walked back when it felt like the right time. He took another bite. He wasn't being evasive. He was being finished. Like the conversation had a predetermined length, and he'd reached it. I told myself it was post-event disorientation, memory gaps, emotional shock. The literature covers all of it. I figured the debrief team would sort out details later and the report would get amended. It never did. October. A married couple from Fort Collins. Missing from the Timber Creek Trail since Saturday. Same pattern, permit signed, car in the lot, no signal, no trail sign. SAR deployed Sunday. Dogs struck nothing. By Tuesday evening, their adult daughter had driven up from Denver and was sitting in the station lobby asking the kind of questions nobody wants to answer. Wednesday morning, I came in and the case was closed. Returned 3:17 a.m. 4th night. Ambulatory, no visible injury, cooperative with intake. I pulled the gear inventory because I wanted to see the numbers. Part of my role that season was equipment reconciliation, matching what comes back against what the permit says went out. Boots, pack weight, water, layers. It's checkbox work. Tedious? Except the checkboxes on this one were too perfect. 4 days in the Rockies in October. Elevation above 9,000 feet. Freezing overnights. And their water bladders held the exact volume declared on the permit, not refilled the same volume. To the ounce. You don't walk 4 days in the mountains and come back with exactly the water you started with. That's not how thermodynamics works. That's not how bodies work. Their boot treads were factory fresh. I've pulled gear off day hikers who were out 6 hours and came back with visible sole wear from the granite. This couple had been gone 96 hours and their boots looked like they'd been unboxed in the parking lot. I started a personal spreadsheet. Time, date, case number, anomalies noted. I didn't flag anything officially. I just wanted the numbers clean and in one place so I could see if I was imagining things. November gave me my third entry. Solo hiker, woman in her 50s, gone missing on the Pawnee Pass Trail. She walked back into Glacier Creek, a completely different trailhead, 7 miles from where she started. Across a ridge you'd need a full day to cross in good conditions. She did it in the dark. She wasn't winded. 3:17 a.m., fourth night. That one bothered me more than the others, and I spent an evening trying to figure out why. Then I realized I'd stopped being surprised by the timestamp and the fourth night. Those had already become expected. What bothered me was the trailhead. She came out at Glacier Creek because that's where the others came out, not because it was close to her route, not because it was a logical exit, because the return point was fixed. It was always Glacier Creek. It was always 3:17. The hikers didn't choose where to walk back to. They were delivered. I started asking around, not pushing, conversational. Hey, have you noticed the 3:17 thing? Nobody was surprised. I expected denial or alarm and got neither. What I got was something that felt worse. I got familiarity. Dawson, my shift lead, had been at Elk Basin 11 years. I brought it up during a vehicle check one morning. He didn't look up from the tire pressure gauge. Yeah, the 317s, he said it like it was a category, like the July traffic spikes or the Tuesday resupplies, a scheduling feature. How long? I asked. Longer than me? And nobody's reported it? Reported what? He looked at me then, not annoyed, patient. They come back, Galvan. They're healthy. Families are happy. The reports are accurate. The reports all say the same thing, because the same thing keeps happening. I stood there in the motor pool with the smell of tire rubber and diesel, and I understood that Dawson wasn't stonewalling me. He'd had this exact conversation before, probably more than once. He was running it from memory, the way you run a checklist you've done 1,000 times, and the conversation had a built-in ending, and I just reached it. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my apartment in Granby, staring at the ceiling, and I kept checking the clock on my phone. Not on purpose, I just kept finding it in my hand, screen on, and every time I looked, the time was wrong. Not 3:17, just wrong in the way that a number you're watching for starts appearing everywhere when your brain is primed to see it. 11:17, 1:17. I put the phone in a drawer and still couldn't sleep. I was running Dawson's voice in my head on a loop. The reports are accurate. He was right. That was the problem. The reports were accurate. They described exactly what happened. Hikers left, hikers returned. The gap in between wasn't a mystery the reports were hiding. It was a space the reports were designed around, the way a frame is designed around the empty part of a window. The next morning I logged into the station's case archive from my laptop, remote access through the VPN, nothing unusual, we all use it for report work. I filtered missing persons closures between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m., 26 cases in 7 years. Every single one timestamped at 3:17 a.m. Every single one on the fourth night. Every single closure using identical language. Ambulatory, no visible injury, cooperative with intake. Solo hikers, couples, families, groups of strangers who'd entered the park on different days from different trailheads. All of them walking out together. All of them walking out at Glacier Creek. I sat with that for a while. 26. In 7 years. That's not a statistical cluster. That's a schedule. Then I open the intake interview audio files. The park records them 15-minute structured interviews for liability. I picked 2 at random from returns 6 months apart. Different hikers, different seasons, different interviewing rangers. Both recordings hit the same standard question at the 8-minute mark. Can you describe what prompted your decision to return to the trailhead? The first hiker, a man, late 30s, August return, paused for exactly 2 seconds. Then he said, "It was time to come back, and we knew where to go." The second hiker, a woman, early 60s, February return, paused for exactly 2 seconds. Same duration, I timed it. Then she said, "It was time to come back, and we knew where to go." 9 words. Same sentence, same cadence, same slight emphasis on "knew," like the word carried more weight than they expected it to. 2 strangers, 6 months apart, with no possible connection, producing identical language, with identical timing, in response to a routine question. I played them back to back 4 times. I wasn't projecting. It was the same sentence spoken by 2 different throats. I closed the laptop. I sat at my kitchen table and I realized my hands were flat on the surface, pressed down, like I was bracing against something. I don't know when I'd started doing that. I looked at the microwave clock. 3:17 a.m. I hadn't checked the time in over an hour. I'd been sitting there longer than I thought. The apartment was silent. Granby was silent. And I understood, in the way you understand something your body figured out before your brain caught up, that the station hadn't built a workflow around the 3:17 returns because they didn't know what was happening. They built it because they did know. They knew exactly what was happening and had decided collectively years ago that the correct response was to process it, file it, and never look at the space in the middle. I didn't know yet what was in the space. I didn't know why the returned hikers shared language they'd never learned from each other. And I didn't know not until the next disappearance, not until I was standing in that parking lot myself, why the things they knew were always about me. I changed how I did the interviews after that. Not officially. I didn't file a new protocol request or tell Dawson I was adjusting my approach. I just started asking different questions. The standard intake form has 15 prompts: name, permit number, last known position, physical condition, all the liability boxes. I kept those, but I started adding my own at the end, casual, conversational, like I was just making small talk while the paperwork printed. "What do you eat out there? Did you sleep much? When you started walking back, was it light or dark? Were you walking with the others the whole time, or did you meet up closer to the trailhead?" Simple stuff. The kind of questions that should produce messy, contradictory human answers. People who've been lost for 4 days should have stories. They should argue about details. One person remembers rain, another doesn't. One person thinks they were heading south, the other swears it was east. That's how memory works under stress. It fragments, and each fragment is different. The 3:17 returnees didn't contradict each other, but they didn't agree either. That's what I couldn't get past. Their answers didn't intersect. It was like each of them had been somewhere completely separate and come back with a private experience that had nothing to do with the others. But none of them found that strange. I'd ask a group of 4 who walked out shoulder to shoulder at 3:17 whether they'd traveled together, and each one would say yes, while describing a completely different landscape. One mentioned a creek. One mentioned a ridge with no trees. One described walking through fog for what she thought was a full day. The 4th said it was sunny the whole time, and he'd mostly sat and waited. They weren't confused by the discrepancies. They weren't even aware of them. When I'd read one person's description back to another, they'd nod, agree, and then repeat their own version without changing a word. Both were true to them. The contradiction didn't register. It was like the part of the brain that Flag's inconsistency had been turned down to 0. I documented everything. My spreadsheet grew columns: timestamp, case number, return group composition, gear condition, individual interview responses categorized by sensory detail, emotional affect, and specificity of geographic memory. I was treating it like field research because that was the only frame I had that kept me functional. If I was collecting data, I was doing my job. If I was doing my job, I wasn't the guy who lies awake staring at his microwave clock. The next return happened in late January. 3 hikers, a father-daughter pair from Boulder, and a solo backpacker from out of state, a woman named Kieran Mills. They'd gone missing on 3 separate days from 2 separate trailheads. The father and daughter were last seen on the Timber Creek Trail on a Thursday. Kieran Mills signed in at the Glacier Creek kiosk on Saturday and never checked back in. By Tuesday night, SAR had burned through 80 man-hours with nothing to show for it. The father's wife was calling the station every 4 hours. Kieran's emergency contact, a sister in Michigan, had already hired a private search consultant. Wednesday, 3:17 a.m. All 3 of them walked into the Glacier Creek lot together. I wasn't there for the intake. Ranger Brewer processed them again. Night shift. But I was first in the next morning, and I asked Dawson to let me run the follow-up interviews. He looked at me for a second. "You want the debriefs?" "I want to be thorough. They're already cleared, medical signed off. Families are driving up." "I know, I just want to close the file clean." He handed me the intake forms without further comment. That was the thing about Dawson. He never said no. He never said be careful. He just processed the request and moved on. It took me longer than it should have to realize that was its own kind of warning. I sat up in the small conference room off the main office, the one we use for incident reviews and visiting researchers. Plastic table, 4 chairs, a digital recorder, a window overlooking the maintenance yard. Normal room. I'd sat in it 100 times. The father came in first. Glenn Ashby, 56, retired engineer. He sat down and folded his hands on the table and smiled at me like we were about to have a pleasant lunch. He looked rested. His color was good. His hands were clean, not trail clean, not washed at a creek clean, but clean like he'd showered that morning with soap and warm water. 4 days missing above 9,000 feet in January, and the man looked like he'd just come from a hotel. I ran the standard questions. He answered everything cooperatively, directly, with no hesitation and no detail. Where did he sleep? He couldn't remember specifically. What did he eat? He wasn't sure. Was his daughter with him the whole time? Of course. When did they decide to come back? When it felt right. I asked him if he'd met anyone else out there. "We walked back together," he said. "The 3 of us. You and Emma and Kieran Mills?" "That's right." "You met Kieran on the trail?" "We were together." "From the beginning?" He paused for exactly 2 seconds. The same pause. I'd heard it on the audio files. 2 seconds of silence. Then the answer, like the sentence was being loaded from somewhere. "We were together," he said again and smiled. Not evasive, not defensive, just done. I interviewed Emma next. 23. Recent college graduate, strong hiker, had done the Timber Creek Loop twice before according to her permit history. She sat the same way her father had, hands folded, relaxed, good posture, same clean appearance, same rested calm. I asked her the same questions. Her answers were cooperative, direct, and completely different from her father's in every sensory particular. She described a night sky she'd watched for hours. Her father hadn't mentioned the sky. She described a sound like wind through a very long hallway. Her father described silence. She said they'd walked a considerable distance to reach the trailhead. Her father said it hadn't been far at all. Neither of them registered the contradictions when I pointed them out. Emma nodded at her father's version, said, "Sure, that sounds right," and then restated her own without modifying a single word. She wasn't lying. She wasn't confused. She just held both versions as equally true, like a person who can look at an optical illusion and see both images at once without choosing. Then I brought in Kieran Mills. Kieran was 31, lean, quiet. She worked in data analytics for a nonprofit in Bozeman. She'd been solo hiking the Glacier Creek corridor as a weekend trip and had missed her Sunday checkout. Her sister had been calling the station in tears for 3 days. When Kieran sat down across from me, she looked exactly like the other two, rested, clean, calm, cooperative. She folded her hands on the table. Same posture. I realized I was looking at a gesture that 3 unrelated people had made independently within the same hour, in the same chair, with the same muscle memory. Like they'd all practiced sitting in the same class. I ran the questions. Same cooperative non-answers. No geographic specifics, no timeline. No memory of food, shelter, or sleep. She described being somewhere open and feeling a sense of direction that told her when to come back. She used the word new, with the same odd weight the audio files had captured. I knew it was time. Not believed, not felt. Knew. I was almost through the form when I decided to go off script. Not a planned question, something that came out of me the way a reflex does, because I'd been sitting in that room for 90 minutes, listening to 3 people describe the same nothing in 3 different ways, and the precision of the nothing was wearing a hole in my composure. "Kieran, does it bother you that you can't remember where you were?" She looked at me. Really looked. The first time any of the 3 had made eye contact that felt like it had weight behind it. "It doesn't bother me, Ranger Galvan." I hadn't told her my name. It wasn't on the intake form she'd signed. Those are processed by the night shift ranger, and Brewer's name was on the header, not mine. My nameplate wasn't on the door. I wasn't wearing a badge with my full name. She'd been in the station for less than 3 hours, and she'd been escorted to the conference room by a volunteer who goes by his first name only. "How do you know my name?" I asked. She didn't blink. She didn't hesitate. She didn't do the thing people do when they realize they've said something they shouldn't have, that quick flicker of recalculation. There was no recalculation. She just answered, "You're the one who's been paying attention." 5 seconds of silence. The recorder was running. The maintenance yard was visible through the window. A truck backed up outside. Somewhere down the hall, someone was laughing. "Your knee's better in the mornings, isn't it?" she said, gently, like she was telling me something I needed to hear. "Before you've been on it all day? You should get the imaging done. You keep putting it off. My knee has been bad since a fall when I was 19. Torn cartilage that never got properly repaired. I've never told anyone at the station I don't limp. I've trained myself out of it. It aches after long shifts, and I take ibuprofen in my truck where nobody sees. The imaging referral has been sitting in my email for 8 months because I don't want to know if it's gotten worse. No one at Elk Basin knows about the referral. No one in Granby knows. My mother knows. My physical therapist in Denver knows. That's it." Kieran Mills sat in the plastic chair and looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as fond, like I was someone she'd known for a long time and was glad to see doing well. She didn't say anything else. She folded her hands again and waited for the next question. I didn't have a next question. I had a recorder full of audio that proved a stranger who'd been missing for 4 days knew things about my body that I hadn't told my own coworkers. I ended the interview. She thanked me, stood up, and walked out. Same smooth gait as the others. Same unhurried calm. I sat in the conference room for 20 minutes after she left. The recorder was still running. I should have turned it off. I could hear myself breathing on the playback later even, steady, controlled. I sounded fine. I wasn't fine. I was sitting very still because I was afraid that if I stood up, I would walk straight to my truck and drive to Denver and never come back. And I wasn't ready to be the person who did that. I reported it that afternoon in the staff meeting. 9 people in the room, including Dawson, 2 senior rangers, and the district liaison who drives up from Granby on Wednesdays. I said clearly and specifically that a returned hiker had demonstrated knowledge of my personal medical information during a recorded interview, and that I believed the 317 return cases required a formal review. I expected pushback, arguments. Maybe someone would tell me I was reading too much into a lucky guess. That would have been something I could work with. What I got was silence, not stunned silence, administrative silence. The silence of people waiting for an item to finish so they can move to the next one on the agenda. Dawson nodded. The liaison wrote something in her notebook. One of the senior rangers, a woman named Coffee, who'd been at the station longer than anyone, looked at me with the same expression Dawson had used in the motor. Patient. Practiced. We'll note it, Dawson said. Anything else for the weekly? The meeting moved on to trail maintenance. Afterward, Coffee caught me in the hallway. She was carrying a coffee, and she didn't slow down. She just fell into step beside me like we happened to be going the same direction. Every ranger goes through it, she said, not unkindly. The noticing, the spreadsheets, the questions that don't go anywhere. You pay attention for a while and then you stop. What if I don't stop? She took a sip of her coffee. We were passing the break room. Someone had left the radio on and it was playing something with a fiddle. Then you find out it doesn't matter whether you stop or not. She turned into the break room and was gone. I stood in the hallway with the fiddle music bleeding through the door, and I felt something I hadn't felt before. Not fear, exactly. Fear I could have handled. Fear is a reaction to a threat, and a threat is something you can face or run from. What I felt was the specific helplessness of someone who has raised an alarm in a room full of people and watched every single one of them hear it clearly and decide in real time not to respond. Not because they disagreed, because responding wasn't part of the workflow. I went back to my desk. I pulled up the next day's trail permits and started checking registrations, because that was my job, and my job was the only solid thing left. That's when I saw the name. Next morning's permit list. Glacier Creek Trailhead. Solo day hike. Registered for a 7 a.m. start. Rachel Torrance. I knew Rachel. Not well. She came through the station 2 or 3 times a year. Fit, mid-40s, experienced backcountry hiker. Always solo. She'd stopped at the kiosk the previous spring to ask about water levels on the upper creek, and we'd talked for 10 minutes about the late snowpack. She was smart and careful, and she always filed her permits on time. She was the kind of hiker you don't worry about. I watched her sign in the next morning. I was at the kiosk, doing permit checks, my regular Tuesday assignment. She came up at 6:50, filled out the form, asked about conditions on the upper trail, thanked me, and walked toward the trailhead. Blue rain shell, gray pack, brown hiking boots with red laces. I noticed the laces because they were new bright against the worn leather. She waved without turning around. I watched her walk up the trail until the trees took her. She didn't come back that night. She didn't come back the next night. Her car sat in the lot. Her emergency contact, a husband in Fort Collins, called Wednesday evening. SAR was deployed Thursday morning. Dogs, found nothing. Grid search, found nothing. Her permit was the last record of her entering the park. I sat in my apartment Thursday night with my spreadsheet open, and I counted the days. Thursday was day 3. The 4th night would be Friday. If the pattern held, she would walk into the Glacier Creek lot at 3:17 a.m. Saturday morning. I knew I was going to be there. I knew it the way Kieran Mills had known my name not as a decision, but as a fact that was already true, something I didn't choose so much as recognize. I put in a shift swap request for Friday night. Dawson approved it in 4 minutes. He didn't ask why. I got to the Glacier Creek lot at 11 p.m. Friday, early. Way too early. I told myself I wanted to check the staging sight lines, lighting, vehicle positions. But that was a lie I was telling the professional part of my brain, so the rest of me could sit in my truck, in the dark, for 4 hours, without admitting what I was actually doing. Waiting, like everyone else, because I wasn't alone. There were 2 other vehicles already in the lot when I pulled in. One was a station SUV Ranger Brewers. The other was a White County ambulance, parked at the far end near the trailhead kiosk, with its lights off and engine running. I hadn't requested medical staging. I hadn't told anyone outside the station that I expected a return tonight. But there it was, waiting the same way I was. Engine idling in the January cold, like it had somewhere to be at a very specific time. I walked over to the ambulance. 2 EMTs inside, a man and a woman, both in uniform, both drinking coffee from thermoses. The woman rolled down her window. "Ranger Galvan?" "Yeah, who called you out?" "Dispatch. Scheduled recovery, Glacier Creek 0317. Scheduled." She said the word without inflection, like it was a pickup time for a patient transport. I looked at the dispatch printout clipped to her visor. It had tonight's date, the trailhead name, the time, 0317, and a patient count, 4. Rachel Torrance had gone missing, alone. "Who are the other 3? I asked. The EMT looked at the printout and back at me. "Doesn't say names, just the count." She took a sip of coffee. "Usually comes out right, though." "Usually." I walked back to my truck. Brewer was leaning against his SUV now, arms folded, watching the trailhead. He nodded at me. I realized I had never seen Brewer look surprised. Not once in 4 years. He processed 317 returns, the way a toll booth operator processes cars, one at a time, no questions, next in line. "You been out here for these before?" I asked him. "Every time." "Every 317? That's my shift. That's when they come." "Doesn't that seem—" "Galvan," he said it quietly. Not a warning, an observation. "You're here too?" I didn't have an answer for that. He was right. Whatever question I was about to ask him about why he kept showing up, I was standing in the same parking lot at the same hour, for the same reason. The only difference between us was that I was pretending I had a choice. I sat in my truck. I turned the heater on. I turned it off because the fan noise was covering the silence, and I wanted to hear the silence. That sounds wrong. I didn't want to hear it. I needed to. The lot was quiet in a way that wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the presence of something that wasn't making sound yet. The trees beyond the trailhead kiosk were a solid black wall. No wind, no animal noise. January in the Rockies, and nothing was moving. I checked the clock. 12:40 a.m. I opened my spreadsheet on my phone and scrolled through the entries. 26 returns in 7 years. Average group size, 3.2 persons. Always the 4th night. Always Glacier Creek. Always 317. I'd mapped the original trailheads, the places the hikers were last seen, and they were scattered across the entire park. North side, south side, high country, low valley. No geographic pattern on the input end. But the output was always the same. Wherever they went in, they came out here. As if the park had a drain and this was it. 1:15 a.m. I started thinking about Rachel Torrance's red laces. New laces on old boots. She'd relaced them recently, probably that week. The kind of small maintenance a careful person does before a hike. Check the treads, check the laces, check the pack. She would have stood in her living room or her garage and threaded those laces through the eyelets one at a time, pulling each one snug, and she would have felt the small satisfaction of being prepared, of being someone who takes care of her equipment. That's the kind of person Rachel was. Methodical, attentive, the kind of person who doesn't get lost. 2 a.m. Brewer hadn't moved from his position against the SUV. The ambulance idled. I got out of my truck because sitting was making my knee lock up and I needed to stand. The cold hit me in the chest. 12 degrees, maybe less, with a clarity that made the stars look sharp enough to cut glass. I walked to the edge of the lot where the pavement met the dirt of the trailhead and stood looking up the trail into the dark. Nothing. I stood there long enough for the cold to get into my fingers. I thought about going back to the truck. I thought about driving home. I thought about what Coffee had said then. You find out it doesn't matter whether you stop or not. And I hated that I was proving her right by standing here, but I couldn't leave. Not because something was stopping me. Because Rachel was somewhere up that trail, or beyond it, or wherever the 4 days take them, and I had watched her walk in, and that made it personal in a way I couldn't file away. 2:45 a.m. The ambulance EMT got out and opened the rear doors. She pulled out 4 foil blankets and stacked them on the bumper. 4. She didn't count the blankets, she just grabbed exactly 4. Like she was setting a table for a dinner party where the guest list had been confirmed in advance. I watched her do it, and I felt my stomach drop. Not because of the blankets, because of the efficiency. Everything about this, the staging, the dispatch order, the patient count, the blankets on the bumper was a system. A smooth, practiced, well-oiled system that ran on schedule and hit its marks and processed its outcomes and closed its files. And I was standing inside it now, not as an investigator, not as a whistleblower, but as a component. I was the ranger on site. I had a role. The system had a slot for me, and I had walked into it at 11 p.m., and I was performing my function. 3 a.m. Brewer straightened up. He didn't check his watch. He didn't need to. He walked to the trailhead kiosk and turned on the overhead light, a single fluorescent tube that buzzed and cast a flat white circle on the ground in front of the trail entrance. He stood just outside the circle, hands at his sides. The ambulance EMTs got out and stood by the rear bumper. One of them put on latex gloves. The other held a clipboard. I was still standing at the lot's edge. I didn't move to a position. No one told me where to stand, but I was aware with a nauseating clarity that the 4 of us, me, Brewer, 2 EMTs, had arranged ourselves in the parking lot in a pattern that felt rehearsed. 2 at medical, 1 at the kiosk light, 1 at the perimeter. Like we'd done this before. Like muscle memory I hadn't earned. 3:10 a.m. The silence changed. I don't know how else to describe it. The quality of the silence shifted the way water temperature shifts, not a sound appearing, but the medium itself becoming different, denser, more attentive. I was listening to silence that was listening back. 3:14 a.m. The trees at the trailhead entrance were just black shapes against a blacker background. I stared at them until my eyes ached. Nothing moved. But the space between the trees was doing something, narrowing maybe, or thickening, like the dark was becoming more concentrated along the trail. I blinked, and it was just trees again. 3:16 a.m. I heard footsteps, not from the trail. That's what I expected sound from the direction of the wilderness, getting louder as they approached. But the footsteps didn't have a direction. They were just present. The way a smell can be present without a source. Boots on packed earth. Rhythmic, unhurried. The synchronized cadence of people walking together at the same pace. Getting louder without getting closer. Then they were closer. 4 figures appeared at the edge of the fluorescent light. Not walking out of the trees, walking out of the dark between the trees, like the trail had delivered them to its own front door. They were side by side, shoulder to shoulder, walking at exactly the same speed. Rachel Torrance was on the left. Blue rain shell, gray pack, brown hiking boots with red laces. The laces were bright in the fluorescent light. They were clean. Everything was clean. Her shell was zipped to the same point it had been when she walked away from me 5 days ago. Her pack sat on her shoulders with the same adjustment, the same strap tension. Her hair was pulled back the same way. She looked like a photograph of herself from Tuesday morning, printed and placed in the parking lot at full scale. She was smiling. The other 3 walked beside her, 2 men and a woman I didn't recognize. All of them clean, all of them rested, all of them smiling with that same calm, unhurried, completed expression I'd seen in every 317 returnee. They moved in sync. Not lockstep, nothing that mechanical. But their strides matched. Their arm swings matched. They breathed at the same rate. I could see their breath in the cold air. 4 small clouds appearing and disappearing in unison, like a single organism with 4 sets of lungs. They walked to the kiosk. Brewer was already holding the intake forms. The EMTs moved forward with the foil blankets. The system activated. "Welcome back," Brewer said. The same tone he used for everything. Filing a permit, checking a map, processing a return. Rachel looked at him. "Thank you." Then she looked at me. "Hey, Galvan." She'd never called me by name before. In the 2 or 3 conversations we'd had over the years, she'd called me Ranger or nothing at all. Now she said my name like she'd been saying it for days. Like wherever she'd been, I'd come up in conversation. "Rachel," I said, "are you okay?" "I'm good, really good." She rolled her shoulders under the pack straps. The motion was fluid in a way that didn't look like someone who'd been carrying 30 pounds for 5 days. It looked like someone who just picked up the pack and already knew exactly how it sat. "You didn't have to come out. I wanted to make sure. Your knee's going to be sore tomorrow. You've been standing on the pavement too long. You should have stayed in the truck." There it was again. My knee. The thing no one at the station knew about. The thing Kieran Mills had mentioned in the conference room 3 weeks ago. Rachel said it the same way, gently, with concern, like she was telling a friend something obvious that he kept ignoring. The EMTs checked vitals. Blood pressure, pulse, pupil response, temperature. All normal, all 4 returnees, textbook normal. The woman I didn't recognize had a resting heart rate of 58, which is athlete-level cardio for someone who'd supposedly been lost in the mountains for 4 days without food. Nobody commented on it. It went on the clipboard. I tried to separate Rachel for individual questioning. I wanted her away from the group, in the conference room on the recorder, where I could ask the questions that mattered. My radio clicked before I could say anything. Elk Basin Dispatch. All 317 returnees are to be processed as a group per District Recovery Protocol 77. Individual separation is not authorized without regional approval. Acknowledge. The voice was calm. Professional. Bored, even. I stood in the parking lot holding my radio and realized I had never heard of Protocol 77. I'd read the district manual twice during my first year. It was part of onboarding, and I'm the kind of person who actually reads the manual. There was no Protocol 77. I keyed the radio. "Dispatch, can you confirm the protocol number?" "I'm not finding 77 in the district manual." 3 seconds of dead air. Then, Protocol 77 is a regional standing order. It's not in the district manual. Acknowledge. I looked at Brewer. He was filling out the intake forms. He didn't look up. "Acknowledged," I said. "I processed them as a group." I asked the standard 15 questions. They answered cooperatively, directly, with no detail and no distress. They described the missing days the way you describe a dream that's already fading, not with frustration, but with the easy acceptance of someone who knows the details don't matter because the experience was the point. When I asked the standard question, "Can you describe what prompted your decision to return to the trailhead?" All four of them answered at the same time, not overlapping, in unison. The same 9 words, the same cadence, the same 2-second pause before speaking. It was time to come back, and we knew where to go. The EMTs didn't react. Brewer didn't react. The fluorescent light buzzed. A truck on the highway a mile away shifted gears, and the sound traveled across the valley like something rolling downhill. Then the 4 of them did something that none of the previous return reports had ever documented, because I don't think anyone before me had stayed in the lot long enough to see it. They walked to a car, a silver Subaru Outback parked in the overnight section of the lot. They walked to it together, all 4 of them, and Rachel opened the driver's door with a key she took from her jacket pocket. Except it wasn't Rachel's car. Rachel drove a green Tacoma. It was still parked 3 spaces away. I could see it. The Subaru didn't belong to either of the 2 men. It didn't belong to the other woman. I checked the plate against the overnight parking log later. The plate wasn't in the system. The vehicle wasn't registered to the lot. It wasn't registered to any of the 4 returnees. I ran the plate through the state database on Monday and got no record. Not expired, not stolen, no record. The plate number didn't exist. Rachel got in the driver's seat. The other 3 got in without discussion, same doors, same synchronized motion like they'd rehearsed the choreography. Rachel started the engine. She adjusted the mirror. She pulled out of the space and drove toward the lot exit. And as she passed my truck, she slowed down and looked at me through the window. She wasn't smiling anymore. The expression on her face was something I still don't have a word for. Not fear, not sadness, not the blank calm of the debrief. It was recognition. Deep, specific, personal recognition. The way you look at someone you're leaving behind who doesn't know they're about to go through what you just went through. She held up her hand, not a wave, just a flat palm, fingers together, held up for 2 seconds. And then she drove out of the lot and turned left on the highway toward town. I stood in the fluorescent light and watched the taillights disappear. Brewer was packing up the intake forms. The EMTs were closing the ambulance doors. Everyone was finishing their tasks. The system was shutting down for the night, smooth and clean, like a register closing out at the end of a shift. "Brewer?" I said. "Whose car was that?" He latched his clipboard case and looked up at me, held my eyes for a second longer than he ever had before. "There's always a car," he said. He got in his SUV and drove away. I stood alone in the parking lot. The fluorescent light buzzed above the kiosk. The trailhead entrance was just a gap in the trees, dark and ordinary and empty. Rachel's green Tacoma sat in its space with a thin layer of frost on the windshield. I drove back to Granby. I took the highway. I went the speed limit. I did everything normally. I parked at my apartment and sat in the truck for a while, with the engine off, watching my breath fog the windshield. And I realized I was doing the thing I'd read about in the return interviews, sitting still, waiting, accepting the gap between what happened and what I could explain about it. My radio, which I'd set on the passenger seat, clicked once. A burst of static, then nothing. It was turned off. I'd turned it off when I left the lot. It was still off. The power light was dark. It clicked again. I picked it up and held it. Dead unit. No power. Cold plastic. It didn't click a third time. I put it in the glove box and went inside and locked the door and didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table and I pulled up Rachel Torrance's permit file and stared at her emergency contact information, the husband in Fort Collins. And I thought about calling him to say, "Your wife is fine. She came back. She's healthy and cooperative, and She knows things about strangers' bodies that she shouldn't know, and she drove away in a car that doesn't exist with 3 people she met inside something we don't have a name for, but she's fine. She's better than fine. She looked like the healthiest person I've ever seen. I didn't call. I didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound like I was the one who needed help. I sat at the table until the window went gray and then blue, and then I could hear the neighbor's car starting, and the garbage truck on the next block, and the world was normal again, in the way that worlds are normal when you decide to stop asking why. I went to work. I filed the return report. Ambulatory, no visible injury. Cooperative with intake. I used the word returned. The following week I did something I should have done months earlier. I pulled the park's visitor entry data. Every person who enters on a wilderness permit gets logged name, date, trailhead, expected return. Day hikers who sign in at the kiosks get counted in the daily traffic numbers even if we don't record individual names. Between the permits and the vehicle counters and the kiosk tallies, the park maintains a running head count. It's not perfect. People skip sign-in. People enter from unofficial access points, but it's close enough for the resource management reports that go to the regional office every quarter, and it's close enough for what I was looking for. I pulled the daily headcount data for every date that matched a 317 return over the past 3 years. 11 returns in that window. For each one, I compared the total park headcount on the day the hikers went missing against the headcount on the day after they came back. The math should be simple. 3 people go missing, 3 people come back, the count stays the same. Maybe it fluctuates by a few due to normal daily variation. More visitors on weekends, fewer on Tuesdays, seasonal drift. But the count should center on 0 net change. It didn't. After every single 317 return, the park's headcount was exactly 1 person higher than before the disappearance. Not approximately. Exactly every time. 11 returns across 3 years and 11 times. The park ended up with 1 extra body in the count that hadn't entered through any trailhead, hadn't signed any permit, hadn't been logged by any vehicle counter. Someone was walking out with them. I sat in the station's records room with the spreadsheets printed on actual paper. I'd stopped trusting the screen, which is a sentence I never expected to mean anything, and I went through the numbers a 4th time. The overage was always 1, not 2, not 3. 1, regardless of whether the return group was 2 people or 6. 1 extra every time, absorbed into the park's daily traffic and then into the world beyond the parking lot. 11 returns. 11 extras. Walking among the tourists and the townspeople and the families buying ice cream at the Granby shops. I could be standing next to one and I'd never know. Or maybe I would. Maybe there was a tell the posture, the folded hands, the synchronized breathing, the calm. Maybe the returnees themselves would recognize them. Maybe that was the point. I drove to the address listed on Rachel Torrance's permit. Fort Collins, a neighborhood of split levels near the university. Her green Tacoma was in the driveway. I don't know what I expected. Evidence of distress, maybe, or a husband who'd ask me desperate questions about where his wife had been. What I got was a quiet house on a Tuesday afternoon with the sprinkler running on the lawn and a recycling bin at the curb. I knocked. Rachel's husband answered. Dave Torrance, mid-50s, pleasant. A little confused to see a ranger on his porch outside of the park. Can I help you? I'm following up on Rachel's recovery. Just a standard check-in. It wasn't standard. There's no protocol for home visits after a missing person recovery. I was making it up. And I was wearing my uniform to make the lie feel more official. Dave nodded and invited me in. The house was normal, clean. There were hiking photos on the wall, a dog asleep on the couch, a half-finished crossword on the kitchen table. Rachel wasn't home. He said she was at work. I asked how she'd been since the incident. Great, honestly. He leaned against the kitchen counter. Better than before. She's sleeping better. More energy. She's been talking about switching jobs, actually, something closer to the mountains. That's good. She seems really clear. You know? Like whatever happened out there, it sorted something out for her. He laughed a little. I know that sounds weird. Most people come back from something like that shaken up. Rachel came back and cleaned out the garage. He offered me coffee. I took it. We talked for 10 minutes about nothing. When I asked if she'd mentioned anything unusual about the experience, he said she didn't talk about it much. Said she couldn't remember the details, but she felt good about it. He said the word good the way the returnees said new, with a weight that didn't match the word. I thanked him and left. I sat in my truck on his street and watched the sprinkler make its arc across the lawn, and I realized I wasn't going to find anything wrong here. That was the problem. There was nothing wrong. Rachel was fine. Rachel was better than fine. Her husband was happy. Her life had improved. Whatever the mountain had done to her in 4 days, it had returned her in better condition than it found her. Like a car that goes in for an oil change and comes back with new brakes and a fresh coat of paint. The horror wasn't that something bad was happening to these people. The horror was that something good was happening to them, and nobody had asked what it cost. I drove home the long way. I needed time. On the highway south of Granby, I passed through a town called Harker, small, maybe 800 people, a gas station, and a hardware store, and a school. I'd driven through it 100 times. This time I slowed down because I recognized a face. A woman walking out of the hardware store. I knew her. I'd seen her in the conference room at Elk Basin, sitting with her hands folded on the table, answering my questions with cooperative calm. She was a 317 returnee from the previous autumn, one of the early cases in my spreadsheet. She'd gone missing on the Timber Creek Trail and come back in a group of 3 on the 4th night. She lived in Denver. Her permit listed a Denver address. That's 90 miles from here. I drove past. In the mirror, I saw her get into a car outside the hardware store, a silver Subaru Outback. I couldn't read the plate at that distance. I went home and looked up her case file. Her name was Linda Mallory. Returned October 14th, ambulatory, no visible injury, cooperative with intake. Denver address confirmed. I searched the Harker tax records through the county assessor's public database. Linda Mallory had purchased a home in Harker 3 weeks after her return. Cash sale? No mortgage? I searched for other names, returned hikers from my spreadsheet. 2 more had purchased property in Harker within the same window, one in November, one the following January. Different return groups, different seasons, same town. I pulled up the Harker census data. In 2020, the population was 793. The most recent estimate, updated the previous spring, was 812. A 19-person increase in a rural mountain town that had been losing population for 2 decades. I counted the 317 returnees who'd moved there from my available records. 7 that I could confirm. 7 people from 7 different return groups who had no prior connection to Harker, no family there, no work there, who had all independently relocated to the same small town within weeks of being returned. Plus the extras, the ones who walked out with them, the ones who weren't in any database. I didn't drive to Harker again. I wanted to. The pull was specific, not curiosity exactly, but a gravitational quality. Like the town was a lower elevation and my thoughts kept rolling toward it. I'd be eating dinner or brushing my teeth or reviewing trail permits. And I'd realize I was thinking about the hardware store, the clean streets, the sprinkler on Rachel's lawn, and the thought had a warmth to it, a rightness, like something in my head was running a comparison between my apartment in Granby and a place I'd never lived, and Harker kept winning. I recognized what was happening because I documented it. The returnees described a sense of direction, a knowing. They said the word knew with weight because the knowledge wasn't intellectual, it was gravitational. It pulled. And now it was pulling me. And I hadn't been on the mountain. I hadn't been missing for 4 days. I hadn't walked out of the trees at 3:17 a.m. All I'd done was stand in the parking lot and watch. Proximity. That was enough. Proximity was the vector. I filed a formal incident report with the NPS regional office the next morning. I named the 317 pattern. I cited the head count overage. I included the Harker relocation data. I attached audio clips from the intake interviews. The identical 9-word answer, the 2-second pause, all of it. I sent it through the official channel with my name and badge number and a request for a formal investigation. The response came back in 4 hours. That alone was wrong. I've filed incident reports that sat in the regional queue for weeks. 4 hours meant someone had been waiting for it. Someone had a template ready. The email thanked me for my diligence and thorough documentation. It said the 317 recovery pattern had been noted by the regional office and was being monitored through appropriate channels. It said my observations were consistent with previously reported data and would be incorporated into an ongoing assessment. Then it said my transfer to the Denver administrative office had been approved and my last day at Elk Basin would be the 15th. I hadn't requested a transfer. I had never mentioned a transfer. I checked my sent folder, my personnel file, my union account. Nothing. No transfer request existed anywhere with my name on it. But the approval was real. It came from the regional director's office with a case number and an effective date and a relocation stipend already calculated. I called the regional office. The woman who answered knew my name before I said it. Ranger Galvin, thank you for calling. Your transfer paperwork is being processed. Is there anything else I can help with? I didn't request a transfer. The request was generated through your incident report. It's standard procedure for reporters of ongoing monitoring cases. It protects your position and your benefits. I don't want a transfer. That's noted. The approval will remain in your file as optional. You're welcome to continue at Elk Basin. She paused. Is there anything else? She was polite, professional. The same empty cooperative tone I'd heard from 26 returned hikers. I hung up. I called my union rep. I told him I was being offered an involuntary transfer in response to a formal report, and I wanted it challenged on the record. He took notes. He filed a grievance. He told me it would take 2 weeks to process. I said I wanted a meeting with the district supervisor, on the record, with union representation at the station in person. He arranged it. The meeting happened on a Thursday. 4 people in the room, me, my union rep, Dawson, and the district liaison from Granby. I stated clearly and for the record that I was not accepting the transfer, that I believed the 317 recovery cases warranted formal investigation, and that any retaliatory personnel action would be documented and escalated. Dawson nodded. The liaison wrote in her notebook. My union rep looked satisfied. The transfer was withdrawn. I kept my post. I won. On paper, in the system, in the official record, I won. I raised the alarm. I fought the pushback. I stayed and nothing changed. The next 317 return happened 6 weeks later. March. 2 hikers, both solo entries, both from the Front Range. Gone 4 days. Walked into Glacier Creek at 317 AIM ambulatory, no visible injury, cooperative with intake. I processed them myself. I asked the standard questions. I asked my additional questions. I got the same cooperative non-answers, the same absent geography, the same 9-word sentence in unison when I asked why they came back. Their gear was factory fresh. Their vitals were perfect. I filed the return report. I used the word returned. I did it because it was accurate, because the report described what happened, because the system processed the return, and the families were notified, and the hikers went home, and within 3 weeks, one of them had moved to Harker. I checked, because I still check, because checking is the only thing I do now that feels like resistance, even though I know it isn't. It's just monitoring, it's just the job. That's what coffee meant. It doesn't matter if you stop or not. Stopping and continuing are the same action from different angles. You either look away and the system runs, or you watch and the system runs. The only difference is what it does to you to keep your eyes open. I'm still at Elk Basin. I work day shifts. I check permits. I maintain trails. I process returns. I keep my spreadsheet updated, and I don't show it to anyone because showing it didn't change anything the first time, and it won't change anything now. The regional office knows what I know. Dawson knows what I know. Coffee knows. Brewer knows. And the EMTs know. Everyone knows. The park runs a recovery operation for people who weren't lost, and the recovered come back healthier than they left. And something extra walks out with them every time, and the population of a town 40 miles away keeps growing by ones, and the system is so clean and so efficient and so kind that there's nothing to fight. There's no cruelty to report. There's no suffering to stop. There's only improvement, optimization, people going in and coming back better. I think about Harker every day. I think about it when I wake up and when I eat and when I'm checking permits at the kiosk and when I'm lying in bed at night not sleeping. The thought is warm. The thought is welcoming. The thought says I would sleep better there. The thought says my knee would stop hurting. The thought says I'd finally feel clear. The way Rachel felt clear. The way every returnee describes feeling when they walk out of the trees and into the light. Like something that was always slightly out of focus has finally been adjusted. I haven't gone, I want to say that. I haven't driven to Harker. I haven't looked at real estate. I haven't opened a browser tab for property listings except last Tuesday. Last Tuesday I got home from a shift and sat down at my kitchen table and opened my laptop to update the spreadsheet, and I found a tab already open. Zillow, Harker, Colorado. 3-bedroom, 2-bath corner lot listed at a price I could afford on a ranger's salary. The tab was open. My browser history showed I'd accessed it at 11:47 a.m. during my shift. During a block of time I remember spending at the Trailhead kiosk checking permits. I closed the tab, I cleared the history, I closed the laptop. Wednesday I drove to work and I took Ridgeline Road instead of the highway. It's 4 minutes faster. I've never taken Ridgeline Road. I didn't decide to take it, I was just on it, the way you're just breathing. And when I noticed, I was already 2 miles in, and it felt natural and correct, and it was, objectively, the better route. There was no traffic, the curves were gentle, the view of the valley was beautiful in the early light. It was better. Everything about it was better. I took the highway Thursday, on purpose. I set an alarm and wrote highway on a sticky note on my steering wheel. And I drove the old route, and it took 4 minutes longer, and I sat in traffic behind a truck hauling gravel, and I kept the windows down so the diesel exhaust would taste bad. And I would remember that I chose it. I took Ridgeline Road again Friday. I don't remember deciding to. I'm not writing this from safety. I'm writing this from my kitchen table in Granby on a Saturday afternoon, and I can hear the neighbors' kids playing in the yard and the coffee maker clicking off and the refrigerator humming, and all of it sounds normal, and all of it is normal, and none of it is the problem. The problem is that Harker also sounds normal. Harker sounds better. And every morning when I get in my truck, the road that goes there is waiting, and it's a shorter drive than it used to be. I checked. I measured it twice. Harker is 4 miles closer to Granby than it was in October. I don't know what that means. I know what it feels like. It feels like the space between where I am and where I'm supposed to be is shrinking, and It's not because I'm moving, it's because the town is. The next 317 return is scheduled for Wednesday, and I know because I checked the dispatch log this morning and the staging order was already entered. Glacier Creek 0317, patient count 3. The hikers haven't been reported missing yet. The dispatch entry is dated 4 days from now. I'm going to be there. Not because I have to be, not because the system requires it. I'm going to be there because standing in that parking lot at 3:17 a.m. is the only time I understand exactly what's happening. And understanding is the only thing that still feels like mine, even if it isn't.